I read 5 books in the month of February, and one of them was absolutely massive. And today I'm going to be talking about the 5 books that I read for the month, what was my favorite book, what was my least favorite, and some other bookish updates as well. But let's get started with the books that I read last month, and we're going to start off with the biggest book, the longest book, I should say, the longest book I've ever read, which is Shogun by James Clavell. This story is about an English sailor, John Blackthorne, who finds himself stranded on the shores of feudal Japan in the 1500s, 1600s. He finds himself in the middle of what is an approaching civil war between 2 major lords. I read it on the Kindle because I couldn't get the edition that I wanted. Now the only edition in paperback that is available is the kind of TV show tie-in, because they've got an FX or Hulu show that came out. It's really good, by the way. I've been watching it. And yeah, so they've only got that edition that's out at the moment. I really don't like it when actors are on the cover. It just totally turns me off of wanting to buy the book. So I read it on the Kindle. I think it's about 1,300 pages. If you're listening to this on an audiobook, to kind of put it into some context of the audiobook length, it's 54 hours split into 2 volumes. So you've got to get the 2 volumes in order to enjoy the entire story, 54 hours across both of them. So yeah, this thing is an absolute epic. I have to say, I really enjoyed this book a lot. I thought the setting was incredible. The pacing of it, because it's such a long book, the pacing of it allowed it to feel very immersive. My one complaint is that because a lot of the characters are all following the same strict code of honor, whether that be the samurai or the Portuguese priests, a lot of the characters can kind of merge into one another and start to feel very similar. There's very little variation in the characters, with the exception of maybe 4 or 5 of the major characters, which are a little bit more distinct, but all of the side characters kind of felt like this amorphous blob of characters. I said amorphous, I meant to say amorphous. I tried to get a little bit fancy, and I messed it up. I'm definitely glad I read it. I'm also watching the TV show, as I mentioned, with my wife, and we're both really enjoying that as well. I finished the book actually the day that the first couple of episodes were released, and so it was great timing. And yeah, you can just tell that James Clavell has done a lot of research into that period of time in this location. He has clearly a passion for Asia. He's written this entire Asian saga. So, and I'm sure there are going to be mistakes that are made and parts that aren't exactly correct. But I think that's always going to be the case, isn't it, with any kind of historical fiction? The next book that I read in February was Misery by Stephen King. If I don't read a Stephen King book at least once a month, I turn into a pumpkin. And so I picked this one up. This is definitely one of Stephen King's most famous novels. It became, I think, even more famous in the 90s when Kathy Bates played Annie Wilkes and won the Oscar for Best Actress in the movie adaptation. I was a big fan of the movie, and I've always been curious to pick up the book, and I'm really glad I did, because there are some differences between the book and the movie which surprised me. I think after reading this book, Annie Wilkes is one of my favorite Stephen King villains. I wonder, is she my favorite Stephen King villain? I don't think so, but definitely top 5. And this is actually, I think, the first Stephen King book that I've ever read that had 0 supernatural elements. I'm trying to think if, maybe that'll be the question of the video. Have there been many other Stephen King books that didn't have any supernatural elements to them? Just trying to think. Stand By Me? Is that, but it wasn't called Stand By Me, was it? The short story, but yeah, maybe that. as an example. This book is one of my top 5 Stephen King books. What I'm going to do is read 11/22/63, I think it's called, because everyone just raves about this book, you know, and some of you in the comments have also mentioned that I should really read and review this book. Once I've read that, I think I'm going to be in a situation where I feel comfortable releasing a video of like the best of Stephen King books or something like that, you know, kind of ranking them all. The Misery review is going to be coming out really soon as well. The third book that I read in February was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Oh man, this is a nice little book, you know? It was just what my cousin would call a nice palate cleanser. This is a story about an orc named Viv who decides to just give up her life of carnage and chaos and just open up a coffee shop in town. And it's got a really nice kind of cozy vibe to it. It's part of a subgenre called gaslamp fantasy, which is similar in tone to steampunk, but whereas steampunk is like sci-fi oriented, this is more fantasy oriented, right? So it's got like fantasy creatures like orcs and elves and things like that. The weird thing about this book, I think, is that it's very light on plot. Nothing much of consequence happens. There's a couple of obstacles that the main character meets, but you never really fear for the main characters. It's also known as progression fantasy, where you watch the character progress towards a goal that they have as they accumulate supplies and companions along the road, and they all kind of come together to achieve this goal. So you get that sense. Sometimes you get it when you're playing like an RPG or a video game, when you're progressing along and you're becoming stronger and you're gathering resources, and you get, it's kind of like that satisfaction that you feel. You get that from this book as well. I think with books like this, the plot isn't really the point. You don't read this for an intricate story or to feel any kind of tension or high stakes or anything like that. It's actually the opposite. I think you would read this when you just want to relax and just hang out in a nice place with some nice people and some nice creatures. I think if you want a comparison between this and another popular book, it would be A Psalm for the Wild-Built. It has a very similar feel to that. The next book that I read in February was Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller. This is, I think, a cornerstone of American theatre, and the way that it's formatted is actually as a stage play. So you can see the characters' names on the side and then the dialogue, and then they'll even talk about the stage directions and where the furniture should be moved and all that kind of thing. At no point did that formatting ever take me out of the story. I always felt completely immersed in it. I was just lost in the characters because the characters are so well developed. This story is all about Willie Loman, who is a struggling salesman who can't let go of his dreams of success and his kind of delusions of grandeur despite his failure. And it explores the kind of themes of illusion versus reality, and how sometimes the American dream, although it's so appealing, can be unattainable because the American dream is so alluring, and it's promised that, you know, if you work hard and if you do the right things and you make the right choices, then the American dream is yours to have. And the frustration of having that promise broken, and the impact that it can have on you and your family. It's all about that kind of thing. And I think I've mentioned on this channel before, but I think that's something that a lot of people will be able to relate to. It's a very short read. I got through this in an afternoon, and I was just heartbroken. I was just absolutely torn to pieces over it. I felt so much for the characters, all of them. Because although none of the characters are perfect and they have a lot of flaws, they are, I think, good people. You know, they might be fooling themselves or fooling each other, but they're good people who are suffering. And you feel as though they don't need to. They're putting too much pressure on themselves, especially Willie. He's putting too much pressure on himself. He's following what he thinks society wants him to be. And that's sometimes difficult. And I don't want to get too negative or anything like that. You know, I'm a pretty optimistic person in general, but that's sometimes difficult when the world values material success over personal integrity. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking like that. But this is a really good book. And actually, talking about this book, I think that Willie Loman would have greatly benefited from reading the next book that I read in February, which is A Guide to the Good Life by William B. Irving. This sounds like a self-help book, but it isn't. It's an introduction to Stoicism, the philosophy of Stoicism. I'm a big fan of Stoicism. I think that it really helps me out. I struggle to remain at all times stoic. I don't think anyone can ever remain stoic at all times. But yeah, Stoicism is like a philosophy that just really helps me out to be content with life. And I think that actually the philosophy is really misunderstood in popular culture. When we think of a Stoic, we think of someone stone-faced, looking at an obstacle and just being completely emotionally unmoved by anything, unshakable, but also a bit more than unshakable, unfeeling, you know, never happy, never sad, just always. But that's not really what Stoicism is about. It's a tool to allow you to feel the emotions that you want to feel and just not to like overindulge. I think the most important thing about Stoicism is just remembering that things can always be worse. And so appreciate what you've got, appreciate what you do have, and most importantly, not to focus too much on the things that you can't control. That's like, I would say, the number one rule of Stoicism. Just don't focus too much on things that you have zero control over, because you're just going to drive yourself crazy. And so for all of the books that I read this month, which one was my favorite? It was actually a fantastic reading month. I had a 4-star read, a 4.5-star read, and a 5-star read, my first 5-star read of the year. And Shogun and Misery were both absolutely fantastic. But I've got to say, the best book that I read this month was actually the shortest book that I read this month as well. And that's Death of a Salesman. Just absolutely blew me away. I'm big on characters. Characters are probably the most important thing to me. And Misery had, you know, fantastic characters as well. Annie Wilkes, Paul Sheldon, incredible. But just, I don't know, there was something that really struck me to the core with this book, something that felt authentic, and it just broke me to pieces. And that's one way to make me love a book. It's just to break me up. In terms of channel updates, I'm trying to find out a kind of strategy, or work out a strategy for filming and editing that allows me to release more videos per week. And so hopefully you're going to see more frequent videos coming out. My goal is to do Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday with a couple of shorts in between as well. We'll see how it goes. I'm trying my best. Last month we gained 236 new subscribers, which is up 30% from January. So we're moving in the right direction. Last month we gained 236 new subscribers, and that is up 30% from January. So we're moving in the right direction. And also that means we hit 2,000 subscribers, 2,000 followers for the cults, the booktube channel, the booktube channel. That's what it is. The cult is growing. By the way, hello everyone, welcome to the channel. The most popular video that I released last month was books that I'm most excited to read in 2024. I always find that these videos do a little bit better than the book reviews, just because people are looking for recommendations of books to read. And I also released a fiction roulette video where I let a roulette wheel decide what I'm going to be reading for the month of March. And if you'd like to see that video, then you can click up here. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and happy reading.